I didn't wake up screaming. There was no panic, no nightmare, no dramatic moment that split my life into before and after. I just opened my eyes one morning and understood something that I couldn't put back. This life wasn't mine. The room looked familiar. The ceiling, the walls, the soft sound of the city outside. Everything was exactly where it had always been. And yet, something felt irreversibly wrong, like waking up in a place you recognize but don't belong to anymore. I lay there for a long time, staring at nothing, listening to my own breathing. The clock said it was early. Too early to get up. Too late to fall back asleep. That's when it hit me. I had followed every rule. I had done everything right. And somehow, I had arrived in a life I never actively chose. People talk about midlife crises like they're loud, sudden, irrational. But what happened to me was quiet, surgical. A single thought that cut cleanly through decades of justification. If I had the chance to start over right now, I wouldn't recreate this. That thought terrified me. Not because my life was bad. On paper, it was fine. Stable. Respectable. Predictable. The kind of life people stop questioning because it looks safe. But safety had slowly turned into a prison I hadn't noticed myself building. I started replaying memories, not emotionally at first, just mechanically. Decisions I had made because they were expected. Paths I stayed on because leaving felt irresponsible. Dreams I postponed until they quietly expired. None of it had felt wrong at the time. That's the dangerous part. I had never crashed. Never failed spectacularly. Never hit rock bottom. I had simply drifted, one reasonable choice at a time, into a life shaped more by avoidance than desire. I remembered the younger version of myself vividly. The intensity. The certainty that life would be meaningful, not just manageable. Somewhere along the way, I had traded meaning for maintenance. And I hadn't even noticed when the exchange happened. The morning stretched on. Light filled the room slowly, exposing details I usually ignored. Dust on the shelf. A crack in the paint. Objects accumulated over years of living without intention. I realized how little of myself existed in that space. It wasn't that I hated my life. It was worse. I felt nothing toward it. Indifference is more frightening than misery. Misery demands change. Indifference lets time disappear. I got up, went through the motions of my morning routine, watching myself like an outsider. The familiarity felt rehearsed. Automatic. Like a role I had memorized too well. That day, I went to work. I smiled at the right moments. I answered questions competently. No one noticed anything unusual. How could they? I had been disappearing quietly for years. The thought followed me everywhere. When did I agree to this? Not a single dramatic decision, just a series of yes made out of fear of uncertainty. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of choosing wrong. I had told myself that choosing later was safer than choosing now. Later never came. By the time I reached 40, the shape of my life felt solidified. Commitments layered on commitments. Responsibilities cemented by time. Escape no longer felt heroic, it felt reckless. And yet, staying felt unbearable in a way I had no language for. That night, I sat alone in the dark, and something inside me cracked open. Not loudly. Not violently. Honestly. I admitted a truth I had avoided for decades. I had lived more for approval than for alignment. I had confused being responsible with being alive. I had mistaken endurance for purpose. That admission didn't bring relief. It brought grief. Grief for the years I could no longer touch. For the choices I never made. For the self that learned how to adapt but forgot how to want. And beneath the grief, a terrifying question waited patiently. If this life isn't mine, do I still have time to choose one that is? Once the thought took root, it refused to leave. I tried to silence it the way I always had, by staying busy, by distracting myself, by reminding myself of everything I was supposed to be grateful for. But gratitude can become another form of denial when it's used to avoid truth. The question kept returning, quieter but sharper each time: whose life am I actually living? I started noticing things I had trained myself not to see. How often I agreed automatically. How rarely I expressed a real opinion. How many decisions I made based on minimizing risk rather than pursuing meaning. I had become an expert at maintaining balance. At keeping everything steady. But nothing was moving. The crisis wasn't about age. It was about accumulation. Years of unspoken dissatisfaction had piled up until they formed something solid, something undeniable. I realized that the discomfort I felt wasn't sudden. It had been there for a long time, patiently waiting for me to stop running from it. I looked at my responsibilities differently now. They weren't just obligations, they were anchors. Some were chosen consciously. Others had attached themselves quietly while I wasn't paying attention. The moral dilemma became impossible to ignore. If I chose myself now, I would disrupt lives. I would disappoint people who depended on my consistency. I would be accused of being selfish, reckless, ungrateful. If I didn't choose myself, I would disappear completely. Not physically. Internally. I had spent my life believing that hurting others was the worst possible outcome. What I hadn't considered was the harm of never being honest. Of teaching people a version of me that wasn't real, and then resenting them for believing it. That realization hurt. It meant that my quiet endurance hadn't been noble. It had been avoidant. I started to feel anger, something I rarely allowed myself to feel. Not explosive anger, but a slow-burning resentment toward the life I had helped construct. Toward myself for cooperating so willingly. The anger scared me, but it also energized me. It meant I still cared. At night, I imagined two futures. In one, I stayed. I continued being reliable, predictable, emotionally absent. Life would move forward without resistance. Birthdays. Holidays. Routines. Years passing unnoticed. In the other, I changed something. I didn't know what exactly. I only knew it would be messy. Uncertain. Possibly lonely. But it would be honest. That future terrified me, and attracted me. I understood then that the fear wasn't about failure. It was about responsibility. Choosing meant owning the outcome. No more blaming time, circumstances, or expectations. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. There were moments when I almost convinced myself to let it go. To treat this awakening as a phase. A temporary discomfort that would fade if I ignored it long enough. But once you see the truth, you can't unknow it. Every interaction felt heavier now. Every routine reminded me of the choice I was avoiding. I felt like a guest in my own life, nodding politely while something essential waited outside. The breaking point came quietly. I caught myself giving advice to someone younger, telling them not to wait, not to postpone what mattered, not to live on autopilot. The words felt hollow the moment they left my mouth. I realized I was offering wisdom I hadn't been brave enough to apply to my own life. That hypocrisy hurt more than regret. That night, I admitted something out loud for the first time. No audience. No witnesses. Just me in the dark. I can't keep living like this. Saying it didn't solve anything. But it made the lie impossible to maintain. Admitting the truth didn't change my life overnight. It changed how I could no longer live. Once I said the words out loud, even in an empty room, they echoed everywhere. In every decision I delayed. In every conversation where I felt myself retreating out of habit. In every moment I almost chose comfort over alignment again. I had crossed an internal line. There was no way back to ignorance. The hardest part wasn't deciding what to do next. It was accepting what any decision would cost. Because by 40, life doesn't reset cleanly. It's layered. Interconnected. Every choice pulls on someone else's reality. I understood why I had stayed so long. Staying was predictable. Staying made me useful. Staying allowed me to avoid becoming the villain in someone else's story. Leaving, or even changing, meant rewriting roles people had grown comfortable with. It meant being misunderstood. It meant risking judgment from those who would never feel the consequences of my silence. For a long time, I believed being needed was the same as being valued. It isn't. Being needed can still erase you. The days that followed were heavy. Not dramatic, just dense with awareness. I moved through my routines knowing they were no longer neutral. Every action felt like a vote for the life I was continuing to live. And that knowledge made inaction unbearable. I didn't blow everything up. I didn't run away. I didn't make a single, cinematic decision that solved it all. Instead, I did something quieter, and much harder. I began choosing differently in small, irreversible ways. I stopped agreeing automatically. I allowed disappointment instead of hiding from it. I said no without offering long explanations meant to soften the blow. Each choice felt selfish at first. I had trained myself to equate self-abandonment with kindness. Relearning that boundary and honesty could coexist was uncomfortable. Some people reacted exactly as I feared. Confusion. Resistance. Subtle withdrawal. They preferred the old version of me, the predictable one, the accommodating one, the one who never made them question their expectations. Losing that version felt like a betrayal to them. To me, it felt like survival. There were moments when guilt nearly pulled me back. When I wondered if I was destroying something valuable just to chase a vague sense of authenticity. When I missed the simplicity of not questioning myself. But then I would remember that morning. The weight in my chest. The certainty that this life wasn't mine. And I would keep going. Slowly, something shifted. I didn't become happier in a dramatic sense. But I became present. My days had texture again. Decisions carried weight, but also meaning. I felt tired in an honest way, not the numb exhaustion of a life lived on autopilot. I stopped fantasizing about escape. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally participating. I learned that regret doesn't disappear when you change your life. It softens. It becomes something you carry instead of something that drags you. I will always mourn the years I didn't choose myself sooner. That loss is real. But it no longer defines me. What defines me now is this: I no longer confuse safety with fulfillment. I no longer wait for permission to feel alive. I no longer call endurance a purpose. Waking up at 40 didn't give me a new life. It gave me clarity. And clarity, when acted upon, is a second chance. Not to relive the past. Not to erase mistakes. But to stop making the same one over and over again. If there is a lesson in this confession, it's not about age. It's about awareness. You don't wake up one day and suddenly lose your life. You drift away from it slowly, politely, responsibly, until one morning you realize you've been absent for years. And if you're lucky enough to notice while there's still time, you choose. Even if it's late. Even if it's messy. Even if it costs you. Because a life that is truly yours is worth more than one that merely looks right from the outside. That is what I learned when I woke up at 40. And that is why I finally stayed awake.